They always say we're strong. They look at us, at the ways we keep going, keep working, keep surviving, and they call it resilience. But they never ask what it cost us. They don't ask what it took to become the strong one. They don't see the nights we couldn't sleep, the mornings when we looked in the mirror and couldn't even recognize our own face. They see survival, but they don't see the grief that came with it. Bell Hooks once wrote, "Being oppressed means the absence of choices. And when you spend years surviving with no real choices, no space to rest, no time to grieve, no safety to feel, you don't just lose freedom. You lose yourself. And then one day you realize, the world applauds your strength, but never makes space for your softness. They love how you rise, but they don't want to hear how many times you fell. If you've ever wondered why you feel tired all the time, even when nothing big happened that day, if you've ever felt guilty for needing help, or ashamed for needing rest, then this conversation, this quiet, honest conversation, is for you. Because what Bell Hooks warned us about isn't just political. It's personal. It's about the cost no one sees, the emotional toll of surviving in a world that rarely asks how you're really doing. And maybe today is the first time someone truly does. Nobody wakes up one day and decides to carry emotional armor. It doesn't happen in a single moment. It's quiet, gradual. Sometimes it begins before you even understand what the world expects from you. Maybe it started when you were a child and learned that crying too loudly would only bring silence in return. Maybe it was when you reached for comfort and someone told you to toughen up, to be strong, to stop acting weak. Or maybe it was more subtle, when your smile was praised but your tears were ignored, when your good grades were noticed but your sadness wasn't, when you were applauded for holding it all together but no one ever asked if you needed help. That's how it begins. We build armor not because we want to, but because at some point we have to. The world around us doesn't always feel safe. So we learn to protect ourselves. And this is what Bell Hooks saw with piercing clarity. She saw how trauma, especially collective trauma, from racism, from poverty, from gender violence, from intergenerational abandonment, doesn't just live in our bodies. It trains our behavior. It reshapes our emotional vocabulary. It reprograms how we respond to joy, to pain, to vulnerability. And slowly survival becomes performance. We start saying I'm fine when we're not. We laugh at things that hurt. We become experts at showing up for others and total strangers to ourselves. We give compassion like it's endless, yet feel guilty asking for a sliver of it in return. The world watches this, our endurance, our unshakable grace, and they call us strong. But they don't see that strength was never a choice. It was a condition for love, for safety, for belonging. That's what Bell Hooks meant when she said, being oppressed means the absence of choices. You adapt to what is. And sometimes what is an environment where you're only safe if you're invulnerable. And so we wear armor. Armor that looks like success. Armor that looks like perfection. Armor that looks like always being the one who has it together. And it works until it doesn't. Because that same armor that protected you from rejection, from humiliation, from violence also numbs you. It dulls your ability to feel joy. It blocks intimacy. It teaches you to mistrust softness, even when it's real. You begin to fear your own feelings. You begin to silence your own needs. And eventually you confuse your armor with your identity. This is how emotional survival works in oppressive systems. And Bell Hooks saw how deep that conditioning runs, especially for marginalized communities. She saw how Black women are praised for being strong, but rarely allowed to be human. How poor people are admired for working hard, but punished the moment they rest. How men are trained to suppress tenderness until it calcifies into aggression. How children are shamed for being too expressive, too needy, too sensitive, until they grow up not knowing how to ask for love without fear. She wrote that patriarchy doesn't just dominate women, it dehumanizes everyone by severing us from our emotions. She wrote that capitalism makes us think our worth is measured in how much we produce, not in how much we feel. She wrote that white supremacy doesn't just inflict violence. It erodes the soul, the imagination, the quiet places inside us where trust is born. And when you grow up in these systems, you don't just carry scars. You carry silence. Silence about what hurt you. Silence about what you needed. Silence about what you dream of. Because somewhere along the way you were told, it's safer not to feel. It's easier not to hope. Just get through the day. So we cope. We numb. We distract. We work harder. We overfunction. We become caretakers of others and strangers to our inner selves. And yet the ache remains. That ache, the one that shows up late at night when it's finally quiet. That feeling that something's missing, even though you've checked all the boxes. That tiredness that no amount of sleep can fix. That craving for a gentler life, even if you don't believe you deserve it yet. That's not weakness. That's your soul remembering what it means to feel safe. Bell Hooks didn't just name the problem. She offered us a path back. She reminded us that healing isn't just about breaking down systems. It's about unlearning the lies we've told ourselves to survive within them. She challenged us to ask, who would I be without the armor? What parts of me have I buried because the world didn't make space for them? Can I trust softness, not just in others but in myself? It's terrifying, isn't it? To imagine living without that armor. To risk being seen without the performance. To show up with your wounds not as shame, but as proof that you're still here. But Bell Hooks believed in the transformative power of truth-telling. She believed that when we name what we've lost, when we say it out loud, we begin to loosen the grip trauma has on our bodies. We begin to come home to ourselves. Not as warriors who always fight, but as people who finally give themselves permission to feel. Because the truth is, you are more than what you've survived. You are more than your strength. You are more than the armor you learned to wear. You were always worthy, even when you were broken, even when you were silent, even when you thought you had to hide. And maybe, just maybe, the healing begins the moment you let yourself be fully seen. Even if your voice shakes, even if your hands tremble, even if the armor doesn't come off all at once. Bell Hooks never asked us to be perfect. She asked us to be honest, to be present, to be willing to imagine a life where we're not always defending ourselves from the world, but finally living fully within it. And that imagination, that courage to be soft, is where part 3 begins. There's a moment. It doesn't make noise. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't look like the movies. No dramatic crying, no shattered plates, no screaming into the night. No. The real breaking point of survival is quiet. It's when you sit in your car outside your house for 40 minutes because walking through that front door feels like walking into a storm. It's when someone says, take a break, you've done enough. And you nod. But your body doesn't know how to stop. It's when you finally get a chance to rest. And instead of peace, what comes is panic. You start pacing. You clean obsessively. You check your phone. You feel like you're doing something wrong simply because you're not doing anything. And no one sees it. Because from the outside you look okay. Maybe even accomplished. Maybe even admirable. But inside something has collapsed. And the saddest part? Even you didn't notice it at first. You thought it was just a bad week. Just stress. Just being a little off. But then you realize, you can't remember the last time you truly felt safe. Not just physically safe, but emotionally safe. Safe to be unguarded. Safe to be soft. Safe to be unsure. That's the moment. That's when survival breaks you. Not with violence but with silence. A silence so loud it begins to echo in every part of your day. Bell Hooks warned us about this. She called it the psychic cost of survival. The slow erosion of your inner world, your ability to feel joy, your willingness to trust, your sense of self-worth. In exchange for staying afloat in systems not made for your humanity. She saw how people of color, women, queer folks, poor folks, anyone who exists outside the margins of power, often learn to live with a constant undercurrent of dread. A readiness for the next hit, the next dismissal, the next microaggression, the next emotional withdrawal, the next reminder that you are only welcome here if you shrink. So what do? We survive. We perform normalcy. We work twice as hard to be seen as half as worthy. We give grace to everyone else, and offer none to ourselves. We carry burdens that no one notices until we collapse. And even then some still say, you're so strong. But strength when it comes from fear isn't strength. It's armor. And armor isn't sustainable. There comes a moment, usually when everything is quiet, when your body says, I can't do this anymore. And that moment doesn't always look like breaking down. Sometimes it looks like numbness. You stop caring. You stop hoping. You stop showing up, not because you don't want to, but because you can't. You wake up and feel like the world has no color. The things that once brought you joy now feel hollow. You cancel plans because even the idea of speaking feels too heavy. You start to disappear from your own life. And the world still claps for you, still calls you inspirational, still says you're doing amazing, because the performance is still intact, even if your soul is crumbling. Bell Hooks would call this the rupture, the crack between who you really are and who you've had to become to survive. And for some, that rupture shows up in subtle ways. A gentle hand on your shoulder that makes you cry because no one has touched you gently in months. A kind word that makes you suspicious because you're not used to love without conditions. A moment of rest that feels terrifying because rest means feeling, and feeling might unleash everything you've buried. This is the truth no one talks about. That when you've spent your whole life surviving, peace doesn't feel peaceful. Feels unfamiliar, uncomfortable, even unsafe. Because survival isn't just a condition, it becomes an identity. You begin to believe you are only worthy when you're overcoming, only lovable when you're inspiring, only valuable when you're useful. And that's the most heartbreaking lie of all. Because the truth is, you were always worthy. Even when you were resting. Even when you were struggling. Even when you were simply breathing. But we forget. The world trains us to forget. Until one day, you find yourself sitting in the dark, staring at nothing, and whispering to no one, "I don't know who I am anymore." And that whisper, that soft, shaky whisper, isn't weakness. It's the sound of a soul trying to return home. Because when survival breaks you, not loudly but slowly, quietly, it's not the end. It's the beginning. It's the moment you start to question the armor. The moment you stop glorifying exhaustion. The moment you wonder, what if I don't have to keep living like this? And that question, that fragile, sacred question, is where healing begins. It's not fast. It's not glamorous. But it's real. And Bell Hooks would remind you, healing is an act of communion. Not something you do alone. Not something you have to perform. But something you're allowed to receive. Even if you don't know how. Even if it feels foreign. Even if your body still flinches when love knocks at your door. You're allowed to learn. To relearn. To unlearn. To begin again. Because the moment survival breaks you might also be the moment you finally make room for something else. Freedom. There is a moment, quiet, tender, when something inside you begins to shift. Doesn't look like victory. Doesn't feel like power. Feels like finally telling the truth. The truth that you are tired. That you've been surviving for too long. That you've confused pain with purpose. That you've worn your suffering like a second skin because no one ever told you there was another way. This is the moment where Bell Hooks steps in. Not as a loud voice commanding you to change, but as a gentle witness whispering, "You don't have to keep living like this." You see, Bell Hooks didn't write to impress. She wrote to free. She didn't care if her truths made people uncomfortable. She cared if they healed. She offered us something the world often withholds, permission. Not permission to perform, to push, to prove, but permission to rest. Permission to be soft. Permission to ask, what if strength isn't the point? What if the goal is wholeness? And that changes everything. Because once you see your exhaustion not as weakness, but as evidence, evidence that you've been carrying too much for too long, you begin to question the narrative. The one that said, you're only valuable when you're productive. The one that said, don't feel too much. Don't need too much. Don't speak too much. The one that called you broken when you were simply human. The one that taught you to abandon yourself in order to be accepted. Bell Hooks turned all of that on its head. She told us, love is an action, never simply a feeling. And what a radical thing it is. To love yourself not with spa days or retail therapy or filtered selfies, but with truth. The kind of truth that says, I've been surviving, yes, but I want more than survival now. I want peace. She taught us that healing is not a destination. It's a practice, a choice, a rhythm we slowly relearn, like a song we forgot the words to, but the melody is still somewhere inside us. And healing doesn't always feel good at first, because when you've built your identity on being the strong one, letting go of that identity feels like falling apart. You'll ask, if I'm not strong, then who am I? You'll fear that if you stop carrying everyone, no one will carry you. You'll worry that being soft means being unsafe. But here's the truth Bell Hooks gave us, Over and over in every book, every interview, every act of fierce compassion. You were never meant to carry it alone. You were never meant to do it all. You are not a machine. You are not a product. You are not the sum of your productivity. You are not your trauma. You are a soul, capable of joy, worthy of rest, entitled to tenderness. And when you start living from that truth, not as a wish but as a right, you begin to notice the ways you've betrayed yourself. Not out of malice, but out of habit. You stayed quiet when you wanted to speak. You said yes when your whole body was begging you to say no. You accepted less because you didn't believe more was available to you. And Bell Hooks doesn't shame you for that. She honors it. She names it. And then she asks you to choose differently. Not dramatically. Not overnight. But moment by moment. You start to pause before you overextend yourself. You start to breathe before reacting out of guilt. You start to whisper to yourself, it's okay to take up space. It's okay to need. It's okay to feel. This is what liberation looks like from the inside out. Not fireworks. Not perfection. But slowly, quietly returning to yourself. To the parts you buried. To the softness you hid. To the grief you never gave time to. To the dreams you told yourself were too late to chase. And here's what's beautiful. Once you make space for yourself, you begin to make space for others too. You start seeing people's armor not as rudeness but as pain. You start understanding that the strong friend might be breaking. You start offering grace because you've tasted what it feels like to receive it. Bell Hooks always rooted her work in community. She knew that we don't heal in isolation. That true love, radical love, is collective. It's what happens when we see each other without performance. When we sit with someone and say, you don't have to be okay for me to love you. And maybe that's what you need to hear today. That you don't have to be okay. You don't have to be inspiring. You don't have to be healed to be worthy of love. You are allowed to be in process. You are allowed to be undone. You are allowed to take your time. Because the truth that Bell Hooks offered us isn't flashy. It's not complicated. It's this. We can choose to love. In fact, we must. And that love begins here. In this moment. With this breath. With the quiet courage to say, I want more than survival. I want to live. So now that we've told the truth, now that we've named the cost of survival, what happens next? This is the part where the world usually tells you to push harder, to fix yourself, to hustle toward healing like it's another checklist. But Bell Hooks would stop you right there. She would look at your tired eyes, your clenched jaw, your overworked heart, and she would say something so radically simple it might just undo you. Rest is not a reward. It's your birthright. Not earned. Not negotiated. Not justified by how much you've suffered. Just yours. In a world obsessed with performance, with productivity, with proving your worth at every turn, choosing to rest becomes a revolutionary act. Because rest says, I am not a machine. I am not your expectation. I am not here to be consumed. Rest says, I belong to myself. And that is dangerous to systems built on your constant exhaustion. Bell Hooks warned us that the very systems we live in, patriarchy, white supremacy, capitalism, depend on our disconnection. They depend on us staying busy, staying numb, staying in motion so we never have time to stop and ask, what do I actually want? Who am I when I'm not performing? What does my body sound like when it's not screaming for relief? That's why the invitation to rest isn't about sleep alone. It's about softness, about presence, about choosing to no longer abandon yourself. It starts with the smallest things. Saying no to something that drains you, even if it disappoints someone. Letting yourself nap in the middle of the day without guilt. Turning off your phone and lighting a candle, not to post it but to be there, truly there with yourself. It's refusing to apologize for the space you take up. It's allowing your body to exhale deeply, fully, without rushing back into control. It's holding your own heart with both hands and whispering, you've done enough. You've always been enough. And here's the beauty. The more you honor rest, the more you discover who you are underneath the armor. You begin to realize that your value was never in how hard you worked. It was never in how well you held it together. It was never in how little you asked for. Your value is in your being, in your laughter, in your stillness, in the way you care, in the way you listen, In the way you weep during quiet movies and hum softly while folding laundry. In the thousands of tiny moments you thought didn't matter, but made you you. Rest returns you to those moments. It returns you to yourself. And once you experience that return, even for a moment, you begin to hunger for a life that allows more of it. More quiet. More breath. More joy that isn't earned, but simply received. This is what bell hooks meant by healing as a practice of freedom. Not freedom as escape. Not freedom as status. But freedom as wholeness. The kind of freedom where you no longer feel guilty for needing care. Where your softness is no longer a liability. Where you stop trying to prove your pain to people who never listened in the first place. This is not selfishness. It's reclamation. Because the world has taken enough from you already. Your time. Your innocence. Your belief that you mattered without performing. It doesn't get to take your healing too. Bell hooks knew that rest is political. Especially for the oppressed. Because rest refuses to participate in your own dehumanization. It says, I will not build a life on burnout. I will not pass down exhaustion to my children. I will not trade my peace for approval ever again. So maybe you begin here. Not with a dramatic transformation. Not with some grand declaration. But with one quiet, holy choice. To rest. To lie down, even when the dishes aren't done. To breathe, even when the emails are piling up. To stop. Even when your fear says keep going or you'll fall behind. And when that voice rises, the voice that says you're being lazy, dramatic, irresponsible, you tell it the truth. I'm not lazy. I'm listening to my soul. Because your soul doesn't want more punishment. It wants peace. And that peace begins with honoring the quiet voice inside you that says, I'm ready to be free. If bell hooks were still here, not on a stage, not behind a podium, but just here with you, she wouldn't start with answers. She wouldn't offer a list of things to do. She wouldn't ask for your resume or your trauma history or your 5-year plan. She'd sit beside you, with her hands gently folded, her gaze soft but direct, and she'd say your name like it matters, like it always has. And maybe, after a moment of silence long enough for your shoulders to begin to drop, she would say, you've already survived. Now it's time to be free. Not in a loud, triumphant way. Not in some fireworks Hollywood sort of transformation, but in a way that makes you realize you've been carrying too much for too long, and you don't have to anymore. She'd see the armor you're still wearing, the smile you put on even when you're hurting, the stories you tell to make your pain more palatable to others, the way you shrink in conversation so no one thinks you're too much, the way you still believe deep down that love must be earned. She'd see all of it, and she wouldn't judge a single thing. Because bell hooks understood that survival asks you to contort, to bend, to hide, to perform, and healing, real radical healing, asks you to slowly unfold. She wouldn't rush you. She'd say, take your time, beloved. Unfold slowly. You've been tight for so long. She'd ask you to stop apologizing for your softness, to stop feeling guilty for needing more, to stop believing that you are only worthy if you are useful to someone else. And maybe you'd protest a little. You'd say, but I don't know how. I'm not there yet. I still flinch when someone gets too close. And she would smile gently. The kind of smile that knows something you don't know yet. The kind that says, it's okay. You're not supposed to be ready. You're just supposed to be willing. Because readiness is a myth. No one ever feels ready to love again. Or rest. Or forgive themselves. Or try. But you do it anyway. Not because you're brave. But because your soul wants to breathe. Bell hooks would tell you, love is not about what you've achieved. It's about what you're willing to believe, about yourself, about others, about what's still possible. She would remind you that healing is not a straight line, that you will stumble, you will get angry, you will want to go back to the numbness because feeling hurts, but you won't be alone. Because somewhere, someone else is also learning how to be soft again. Someone else is learning how to rest without guilt. Someone else is learning that their value doesn't live in the opinions of others. And you? You are part of that someone else's healing. You are proof that people can survive and still choose tenderness. You are living testimony that broken doesn't mean worthless. That weary doesn't mean weak. That soft doesn't mean small. And bell hooks would be proud. Not of what you've done, but of what you've dared to undo. The silence you've broken. the compassion you've offered yourself, the moments where you said, "No more." She'd whisper, "You get to choose now. You don't owe your life to fear. You are not here to be palatable. You are not here to prove anything. You are here to live. Fully. Messily. Gloriously." And maybe, just maybe, you'd start to believe her. Maybe you'd put the phone down. Maybe you'd stop explaining yourself to people who never really saw you. Maybe you'd look in the mirror and see not a fixer-upper, but a miracle. Because that's what bell hooks gave us. Not permission to be perfect, but permission to be human. To mourn what we lost. To tend to what still hurts. To protect what is sacred, even if no one else sees its value. To reclaim our softness in a world that weaponized it. She didn't speak to the polished version of us. She spoke to the one sitting barefoot in the middle of the floor, wondering how to keep going. The version of us that is raw and honest and unfiltered. The version of us that we try to hide. And to that version she'd say, "Beloved, you are not behind. You are not broken. You are not too much. You are finally starting to remember who you were before the world told you to forget." And maybe tonight you whisper back, "I'm tired, but I'm still here." And maybe that's enough. So here we are. At the end of this quiet conversation. At the end of a journey not of miles, but of layers peeled back. Of truths laid bare. Of masks gently set aside. And maybe you're wondering, what now? Now that you've looked your pain in the eye. Now that you've traced the shape of your survival story and seen how heavy it really was. Now that you've heard the gentle, radical voice of bell hooks whispering, you deserve more than just making it. The truth is, there's no grand finale. No fireworks. No loud epiphany. Just this, you are allowed to be soft. Not when you've earned it. Not when you've healed enough. Not when you've fixed your past. Not when everyone else is okay first. Now. Today. Right here, in the quiet place where your breath still trembles and your eyes still carry grief. You are allowed to be gentle with yourself. That's not weakness. That's wisdom. Because bell hooks didn't fight for us to pretend. She fought for us to feel. To feel the full spectrum of who we are, the anger, the ache, the wonder, the warmth. To no longer split ourselves between what the world accepts and what our soul needs. And maybe for the first time you understand what liberation actually feels like. Not a headline. Not a chant. But the sacred, everyday act of saying, "I choose myself. I protect my peace. I speak with tenderness. I no longer betray my softness to earn love." It might feel strange at first. Choosing rest. Choosing to step back. Choosing to take up space in ways that don't serve performance but presence. You might want to reach for the old habits. Overworking. People-pleasing. Shrinking yourself. Numbing your joy before it gets too loud. That's okay. This isn't a test. You're not behind. Healing is not about always getting it right. It's about remembering again and again that you have a choice now. You get to live by a different rhythm. You get to ask different questions. Not, "How can I be more productive?" But, "What feels like peace today?" Not, "How can I prove I matter?" But, "What if I already do?" Not, "Who do I need to become to be worthy of love?" But, "What if being exactly who I am is already enough?" Because the truth bell hooks handed to us, and now we hand to each other, is this: you do not have to harden to survive. You do not have to disappear to be accepted. You do not have to win to be loved. You just have to stay. Stay present. Stay honest. Stay willing to come back to yourself, no matter how many times you've left. And that return over and over again is the holiest kind of revolution. So if no one has told you lately, let this be the moment. You don't have to carry everything. You don't have to smile through the pain. You don't have to be the strong one every time. You are allowed to exhale. You are allowed to fall apart. You are allowed to let love find you. Not when you're perfect, but when you're real. Bell hooks didn't live and write and pour herself into the world so you would keep performing. She did it so you could be free. So you could take off the armor. So you could come home to yourself. And now, it's your turn. Let the world keep rushing. You can slow down. Let the noise keep shouting. You can rest. Let the expectations pile up. You can whisper. Not today. You can be soft. You can be whole. You can be love in the way bell hooks meant it. fierce, gentle, unapologetically human. So go ahead. Turn off the noise. Step outside. Hold your own hand. Say your own name with kindness. And then, begin again. This time, not as someone who survived, but as someone who is finally free.